What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are now back into our 6-week series on Joseph. And I'm not going to lie, I'm flying a little blind. We had really a joy of being away this weekend with several other guys, I think 12 other guys outside of us at a men's retreat. And
it was great, yeah.
As you were able to kind of come back, we were driving through the mountains as service was going on. So
well, we'll talk about that in a second, but let's get going.
All right, let's do it. All right, Dave. Well, like I mentioned at the top before the intro, we did go on a men's retreat. It was a good time. I'd never been to the Hinton Rural Life Center.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area, for sure, and it was. Facilities were great, and it was close by to do some nice afternoon activities. I took a group hiking, and that was fun. And what did you do? You took another group someplace.
I took a group over. There's a dam up there that's got a little bit of a path as well, so we probably did about a mile and a half on it, and then we went from there and just walked through town, kind of went through some of the antique shops and got some ice cream.
Oh, nice.
Did some geocaching.
Really?
Yeah, actually, Bryce, one of the youth that went with us, he has one of the geocaching apps, and there was 2 in town, so we went and visited both of them. And
nice.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. It was
so
fun.
Cool. Oh, it was very good. It was a good retreat, and I think the men grew closer to each other.
Yep.
And hopefully got something out of it. But I think there were some new relationships, some people who maybe didn't know each other, maybe saw each other in church. So that was good. So did you watch the Super Bowl?
Did watch the Super Bowl, and I am happy with the outcome. Like I said, I kind of wanted the Eagles to win because of how many Georgia players they have on their defense. And that scared me. I physically jumped. If you saw me physically jump, but you couldn't hear through our Nick Boker, who's an avid Eagles fan, just said "Go Birds," but it just scared the life out of me.
Yeah. Usually when he talks to us, that speaker, we have to start over again because something went wrong. But
that's right.
Yeah.
That was good. What did you think about it?
I thought it was good as well. I mean, I really didn't have a dog in the hunt, but I was ready for someone besides the Chiefs to win.
Sure.
I would have been fine if they had won too, because that would have, historically they would have won 3 in a row, and that would have been, that'd been interesting. But I was really expecting a better game than it was.
Yeah, it was quite the blowout.
Wasn't much of a game. I went through my usual irritation of watching those in my generation respond to the halftime show. And look, it's for a different demographic, okay? And our parents didn't like our music either. So why do you feel compelled to have to write stuff on Facebook about it?
Yeah.
That's just the thing. Like, if you don't like it, that's okay. Turn it off. Do something else. You don't have to watch it. You certainly don't have to and that's just, don't get me started on that, but it just, there was a usual thing with that, but it was a good game, interesting game, fun commercials and all that. So
yeah, I do feel like the commercials have been a little lackluster the last couple of years. I don't know. There's not been 1 or 2 that I've been like, that was it. You know what I mean?
Well, they used to. It seems like you would not see the Super Bowl commercial until the Super Bowl.
And now they're all getting leaked.
And now they're a week before. You'll do that, or you'll watch it one of the morning shows, and they'll say, "Here's some of the commercials that are going to be aired," and it's like, great.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it was good. Well, let's get started on that. And actually, this is kind of interesting. I watch another podcast, or listen to another podcast, where a person is talking and the other person is hearing it for the first time.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like this. You were coming back from the men's retreat and didn't get to hear the sermon. I know you know the story of Joseph, but you might be interested in where some of the points landed on that. But when we last left off on our last podcast, we had Joseph in jail for really no reason, except trying to do the right thing. He'd been tempted by Potiphar's wife and rejected her, and she got upset about that and got her husband involved, and not that, but, saying that he tried to do something with her. And so that all ended up going badly, and he ends up in jail.
Right.
And really for just having integrity. He's in there and in there for some time. And so in the story arc of one thing I love about the story of Joseph, and why I think it makes a good sermon series, is there is this definite story arc with some twists and turns in it. And so we find ourselves in one of those places where the story is really going to take a big turn, but it's also, I think, probably the lowest point of Joseph's life. He is in jail, but he, as we talked, I think, on the last podcast, he still continues to just do the next right thing. At that point, I don't think he has any idea that he'll ever get out or, what's going to happen with his life. But he's where he is, where he has found himself. He is just living his life with integrity, and there's just something to be said about that.
Right.
Because when we go through difficult times, sometimes we can end up being, having sort of a victim mentality or whatever, what was me. And wherever we are, to realize God is with us, and we can minister in those places. Yep. And that's where Joseph finds himself. So also, while he's there, these two other guys get thrown in there with him. And one of them, they both had been very closely working with the king. One was a guy who was it'd almost be like the Secret Service. He was kind of the wine taster, made sure that all the food was okay when it came to the king, because I guess that's how they got rid of kings, is they poisoned them,
That's one way to do it.
So he oversaw all that. I don't know if he was a wine taster to make sure if he didn't die, then the king would be okay. But he was the cupbearer, real important position under Pharaoh. And then the other one was the baker. And, so he's in charge of the food, the baked goods, and particularly bread. And so they both been thrown in there. And so one night, they both have these really, really crazy dreams. And so they wake up the next morning and, they're upset because they've had these wild dreams and there's no one there to interpret them.
Right.
And so Joseph comes in and sees them and says, "Hey, why are you so sad? What is going on?" He said, we've had these dreams that seem like they meant something, but we don't know what they mean, and there's no one here that can interpret them. And Joseph reminds them that God is the one who would give interpretation. And so through Joseph, he tells them what their dreams were. And one of them, just not to, you can go back and read about it in Genesis if you want to, what the dreams were. They were kind of weird. But the dream, the interpretation for the cupbearer was that in 3 days, the king's going to forgive you and is going to take all these charges away, and you're going to go right back to the position that you were in before. And so he said, the cupbearer liked that, and he said, Joseph said, "I've just got one thing to ask you. One thing to ask you. I am in here through no fault of my own. And I was, first of all, brought from another country to here, and now I find myself in this bad situation. When you get there, when you get back with the Pharaoh, please remember me and tell him so that I can get out of this place." So the cupbearer agrees to do that, and then the baker says, "Hey, well, that went pretty well. Why don't you tell me the interpretation of my dream?" Yeah. And so he tells him his dream. And Joseph's kind of like, "Well, got some bad news for you, bud. Yeah. In 3 days, the king is going to have you executed." And so, nice. So 3 days later, sure enough, all of that happens. They come and get them. They take them back. The baker is executed, and the cupbearer goes back to his old job. And then the scripture says, but the cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot about him. And so that was one of the first points, is like, there's probably no worse feeling, or certainly there is among the worst feelings you can have, is to feel like you've been forgotten. Yeah. You have been passed over. Someone who has promised you to do you a solid, to do something, and then they just forget. They forget about you. You ever had a situation like that?
Well, I was just sitting here kind of thinking through it. I have like a funnier one is like I remember one time my mom literally left me a Blockbuster when I was young. Not that you guys have to deal with Blockbuster anymore, but for those who might not know what a Blockbuster is, who might be watching, it was just a movie store, where you'd go find movies. It wasn't like Netflix and stuff these days, which I recognize I'm hitting towards the younger demographic when I have to explain this. But
Blockbusters is,
but I was in there, she went over to the grocery store. I was looking for a video game to rent, essentially, and she just forgot that I came with her. Got all the way home, and I think I was at the Blockbuster for like 3 hours. But it was kind of at that point where I started to like panic, like, what's going on? Did something happen to my mom? Blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? That type of stuff.
Yeah, without going into details, I've asked people to do something, to remember to tell somebody something or whatever that was really important to me.
Yeah.
And they just forgot.
Yeah.
And it caused some problems. And so, without going into detail of that, I think you can kind of get the idea. And there are probably some examples that either you might think if you thought about it more, or our listeners might have, of just that feeling of being forgotten. And what do you do? What do you do? And one of the things, points that I would say is that like no one is disposable. And I think sometimes when we feel discounted, it's because, we just sort of we feel discarded.
Yeah.
And if you're ever feeling that way, just know that God has not discarded you.
Well, and it's really kind of funny you said it like that, because it's interesting how we're kind of talking about this on the tail end of the last podcast, which they talked a lot about Goshen and those people they serve, and how I think a real practical example that we've been talking about as a church are some of these kids who just kind of feel like they've been forgotten.
Right, exactly.
Like there's nothing for them.
Promises
there's no space
made.
to go.
Yeah,
exactly.
Promises made that weren't fulfilled. Yeah, I mean, it is. And the one thing, I think that we can take comfort in is that God has not forgotten us.
Yeah.
And another part of it is that wherever we are, and when we're going through those kinds of difficult seasons, is realize that God could be preparing you for something else. And even in jail, God is preparing him. And it was there for a long time. It was, 2 more years, I think, before the cupbearer remembers him. And here's how it happened. The king has some crazy dreams. He has these really, really crazy dreams, 2 of them in one night. And he gets up this next morning, gets all the magicians and all the folks that could interpret dreams together, and says, hey, I've had these dreams. They meant something. Here's what they were. And one of them had this, I'll go ahead and tell those. One of them was this dream about these 7 really fat cows that were down in the Nile. And they were really thriving. And then out of the blue, these 7 really ugly, skinny cows came out and ate the 7 fat cows. And then he wakes up, goes back to sleep, and he has a similar dream. And there's these 7 stalks of grain that are super healthy with lots of heads on them and all that kind of stuff. And then these 7 little weedy kind of stalks of grain come up and they consume the 7. Yeah. And so he tells everybody this dream. No one can do anything with it. We have no idea what it means. And then the cupbearer, like this hits his memory. And he says, you know what? Back when I was in jail, remember that time when you put me in jail? Yeah. Back when I was in jail, there was a guy there, a Canaanite, and he had this unique ability to interpret dreams. And so they send for Joseph. And he comes, and I said on Sunday morning, the way the scripture describes it reminds me of that scene in Wizard of Oz where they get to see the wizard, and then they take them in to clean them up, and they go to the beauty parlor, and they're cutting the lion's toenails and that sort of stuff. Because scripture goes into this some detail about they shaved him and cleaned him up and all that stuff to take him in to see.
Made him presentable.
Yeah. It's probably an inappropriate tangent, but yeah. Just whenever I read that, it reminds me of that. So he comes in, and the king tells him the dream. Pharaoh tells him the dream, and he said, "Okay, here's what it is. Okay, there's 7, right? Okay, so what it means is that for the next 7 years, we're going to have economic prosperity like you've never seen before. The crops are going to be bountiful. It's just going to be a really wonderful, wonderful time. But following that, there's going to be 7 years of famine that are going to be region-wide. That's going to be the worst that we've ever seen. And so what you need to be doing right now during these 7 years is not think it's going to last forever. You need to be putting stuff away. You need to build some storehouses. You need to be getting prepared because you got to get through those next 7 years. Yeah. So take the time now. And if I was you, Pharaoh, Joseph says, I'd find some really, really bright person who can handle that, who really can oversee this operation. And so the Pharaoh says, you know what? If you have the wisdom to interpret the dreams, I think you're the guy. So I'm going to put you in charge of doing that. I'm going to get you out of jail and you come. In fact, you're going to be in charge of it all. There'll be nobody in this whole kingdom that will have any more power than you except for me on the throne. Yeah. But I'm going to let you do this. And so he came to that. So suddenly you have in this one episode and just a few verses, he's goes
from jail to the right-hand man.
Well, prison to the palace. That's what I think I said on Sunday. So that's an incredible, incredible change in the story, and it sets us up for the end. We got 2 more weeks, and so this week we get because remember, the brothers are still back in Canaan, and so they're going to experience this famine, and that's going to set up what eventually becomes a reconciliation with them. But that's the whole adventure within itself. And so one of the things that I've been doing each week is talking about where do we find ourselves in the story, and so at some weeks we've had different characters that we could relate to, but I think there's sort of an overarching thing that applies to everybody in this week, and that is that wherever we find ourselves in life, whether we're in the prison or the palace, we need to acknowledge where our gifts come from, that they come from God, and that God is going to, be with us in the good times and the bad times, and not be not be taking those things for granted. Yep. And what Joseph's done, and I think I've mentioned this maybe in the last podcast even, is that Joseph, one of the things I think we can learn from him, and there's many things, but is that he always seemed to do the next right thing wherever he was. If he's in prison, he's doing the next right thing. And we'll see that even as he gets into his position of power there in Egypt. So it's a great story. Yeah. Lots of chapters to it, and lots of little twists and turns that I think are very kind of unique, and lots of great teaching points to come out of it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I do kind of have a follow-up question, maybe, and I don't know. Maybe you'll be able to answer. Maybe you won't. How do you feel about dreams today? And how do you know when it's not your brain just kind of reordering something and maybe it's a dream from God?
There was somebody said one time, Grit's grandma and God, and it was having to relationship with people's call to ministry. Yeah. You had this dream or you had this feeling, and maybe it's something you ate, and whatever. That's the Grit's part. Or maybe people were following it because the grandmother always wanted to have a preacher in the family. Yeah. Or it might be that you're hearing from God, and so going through the discernment of knowing which is it. So. I think there's things to dreams, and I think God uses dreams. I think back in this day, because we're not talking about a Christian culture, right. And particularly in the Egypt, the Pharaoh's culture, and there was a whole lot of stuff about dreams and interpretations of dreams. Yeah. And I think just on a scientific perspective, there's still something to it, because some people will have some. They may be going through a time of anxiety, and they may have a dream that may be on a theme like, you show up to school and you have to take a test and you're not prepared for it. Ever had that dream? Yeah. Yeah. You're out in public somewhere and you're naked.
Haven't had
have
that
that
one,
dream.
but the falling one, that type of stuff.
The falling one, being able to fly is one that people have. So a lot of those, and people who have studied that say that there's some themes, and I think that the counselors and psychologists and stuff have used that. But I do think that God is the giver of dreams, and I think sometimes God plants things in our mind to inspire us for things. So, yeah, I do think there's something to it. Maybe not as much or on a wild a tangent as some people might take it to, but I think it's worth studying and looking at. And there's books and stuff that you can buy on it. And some of it gets very pseudoscience-y, and some of it gets kind of occultish. So I think you got to be careful with that. But I do think it's something that it's interesting to look at.
Yeah. I've always been fascinated by that idea. Because I did who was it? Sam Halverson one time led the youth group that I was with at the time through a guided meditation, and based on what you kind of saw in the guided meditation could represent certain things in life. And I always found that to be an interesting idea. You know what I mean? To how your brain can process it, and maybe even have some things from God kind of floating in there that you don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know.
I do think it's on a subconscious level. And it happens every night. Everybody dreams every night, even if you don't remember it or not. Everybody is dreaming every night. So that's a lot of brain activity to not mean something. And so I think it's worth studying and interesting to study. And maybe I should do it more. But I think maybe you were sort of alluding to that. You might have seen some people who really go wild with some crazy kind of nonsense, maybe even all around dreams. But definitely.
Just how to know.
Just how.
Something else I was kind of listening to you talk, I was thinking about Joseph and how this time of gap, especially when he's in prison, and you mentioned kind of doing that next right thing. But I'm just amazed thinking about his resilience and almost dedication to just being who God created him to be in those moments. And I was trying to think about it in relation to me and how I feel like I operate and stuff like that. And it's really kind of a master class to watch him to stay as confident as he was and as patient as he was to kind of rise out of the prison. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and one, it's such a great story because it has a really good ending. Not every story has a good ending, but that doesn't take away our need to be faithful wherever we are. I mean, he has no idea that he's going to get out of jail. He's hoping to get out of jail, and probably that's it. He would like to go back.
Just to be able to walk away.
So, I mean, I don't think he has the design of how the story is going to end up, but just the faithfulness that he had set him up for, being prepared for the leadership that he's going to be in. But there are many other stories of people who did that, and the story did not end in the kind of storybook ending that we will have in the story of Joseph. Not everybody's story is going to end up like that. I don't know why, as I just said that, I was thinking of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I don't know if you familiar with him. Do you know? You probably heard the name.
I know the name, and I know a general part of the story.
So he was in Nazi Germany during the time that Hitler was taking over. And so it's interesting to study the church during that time, because the church just went right along with the sort of nationalistic stuff, and they cozied up to Hitler because, out of popularity or fear or whatever. But there were some pastors and leaders who didn't, who were in opposition, and Bonhoeffer was one of them. And so, but he ended up being martyred for his faith. There's another story where that ends up good. But it does in glory. But in this, the time constraints of our world, it doesn't. And so, but he still was. And while we're studying him, years later, is because of the integrity and leadership and discernment that he had.
Yeah.
You know, what was it about this guy that gave him the knowledge, that gave him the courage to stand up and do the things that he did? And so I think whether Joseph's story, we probably wouldn't be studying it, but Joseph's story, regardless of whether it ended the way that it did, he was faithful in those moments.
Yeah.
It's just that, you know, we get to see this story arc unfold, and that's what makes it good. But not everybody's story is going to have the same kind of ending that Joseph had, for sure.
Right.
But you know, just because we're doing this thing doesn't mean we don't do it. And I don't think Joseph did it. We don't do it so that we'll have this end result.
Right.
We do it because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
What is the next right thing to do? So that, you know, that's kind of what we learned from Joseph.
There you go. Well, I'm excited for these next couple weeks we have left of this series before we kind of roll into our Lenten time and all that good stuff, right? Is that what?
Lent's coming up next. We got a couple of things before that, but we'll have time to talk about it in coming weeks.
For sure. But well, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have any comments, any questions, any concerns, or whatever that come around this, what we've talked about, feel free to drop them in the box below on the Facebook, on YouTube, all that good stuff. If there's anything that we can do to pray for you guys, whatever, feel free to shoot us an email. But yeah, anything else before we close out?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you next time.
All right. God bless everybody.